We're coming off of a year of the biggest protests Brazil's ever seen, some of the most aggressive. We've got corruption, financial waste. All of the soccer hooligans are coming to descend on Brazil as well. We've got a pissed off population. It seems like a very, very large powder keg.
Yeah.
In 2007, FIFA chose Brazil to host the World Cup.
Brazil.
It seemed like a brilliant idea, hosting the World Cup in the most football-fanatic country on the planet. Little did they expect that it would become the focus of some of the largest protests Brazil has seen in decades. This mass civil uprising began in June of 2013, and it surprised even the most jaded Brazilians. Hundreds of thousands of people paralyzed cities across the country over a 20-cent increase in bus fares. The police response was brutal in the beginning. Elite military police units trained to pacify Rio's slums were brought to quell demonstrators. But the police violence drove more people into the streets. For the first time anyone can recall, the people began to lose their fear of the police. The protests have been remarkable for another reason. The public outrage bridged wide class differences in Brazil. Rio's college-educated kids are fighting side by side with hardened protesters from the favela, who've borne the brunt of Brazil's brutal police force. Thanks to the World Cup, they now have a common enemy, FIFA, the world governing body of football and the unbridled capitalism that it represents. In exchange for hosting the World Cup, FIFA demanded upgrades to Brazil's infrastructure and internal security that has ballooned into the most expensive in football history, some $15 billion. The government insists all of this spending is worth it.
Nós temos exército, marinha, aeronáutica, a nossa polícia militar, a polícia civil, a polícia federal, mais de 20 mil homens agregados para dar toda a segurança e conforto para aqueles que virão à Copa do Mundo.
But the past year has shown the population is fed up.
Fuck you, FIFA.
This outrage can only be contained through a massive mobilization of troops. 170,000 military and police are being deployed to secure the games. New laws have granted the military and police special powers to arrest demonstrators. In a country emerging from decades of military dictatorship, FIFA and the World Cup have given the police and armed forces a new reason to flex their muscles. Team Brazil may do its magic during the World Cup, but this is not about football anymore. In Rio, we joined probably the most peaceful protest of the year, the annual marijuana march, where everyone is too stoned to cause trouble. We went there to meet up with Matias, who has been filming the chaos in the streets from day one last year. He's part of the movement and an activist in his own right, not afraid to get his camera up in the face of the police.
Vocês estão acuadinhos, vocês estão acuadinhos. Vocês estão com medo, meu irmão? Pô, tá acuadinho, tá tirando aí. Apontou teu direito. Põe, meu irmão. Tá tirando aí. Tá doido, cara. Vocês são malucos, meu irmão. Toma no cu, seus filhos da puta. Olha, atirou na minha câmera. Mas a minha câmera é boa, seu merda. É o filho da polícia. Meu irmão. Vai tomar no teu cu, seu filho da puta. Toma no teu cu.
After hurling a beer can at a cop last year, he was arrested, but even that didn't stop him from filming. We headed to downtown Rio, where one of the largest riots took place, to get an insider's perspective on what the demonstrations are really about.
Let's go.
We're gonna run for it?
Yeah, let's go. Hey. We made it. Rio de Janeiro way of crossing the street, you know? We began with the bus fares. The mayors were re-elected, and as soon they assumed office, they raised bus fares, both in Rio and São Paulo, you know? And that got people really pissed off. It's like they've been tricked, you know? So...
It sounds like politics, man.
It's not about only 20 cents. It's about everything. It's about how quality of life it sucks in Rio and in São Paulo, in the big cities. And the big events such as the World Cup and the Olympics have part of it because people are seeing like how many money is spent for the World Cup. You know, it's already the most expensive World Cup of history.
And it's all for people who don't live here. It's all for the tourists.
Exactly. And it's sad because the Brazilians are such fanatics to football, and it's just like they're missing the best of the party. They're hosting the party, but they
can't be there.
Yeah, it's fucked up.
Matias is taking us to where one of the largest protests in Rio's history took place last year. Most of the protests until then had been hidden from sight and confined to poor areas in the favelas. But this uprising took place right in the middle of downtown Rio.
There was, the protests going all over the country. For some people like, oh my God, this is the fucking revolution's coming. It's the fucking day I waited all my life, People tortured the car down there. I got finally the chance to, first time I seen a car burning, and they don't explode like in the American movies.
They don't explode?
No, they just burn, and... Was our expectation, will it be exploding? No, it didn't.
You didn't get your action movie sequence out of it.
Yeah. If the Brazilian team plays really bad, like in the 2006 World Cup, they sucked. They played really bad, If that happens again, things can get out of control because then all the population will be pissed off with the Brazilian national team, and come on, now there's more like 1 week of these gringos having party here, that can be frightening.
Football and politics are so intertwined in Brazil that whether by accident or design, the presidential elections always happen the same year as the World Cup. The World Cup has been seen as a way for the government to boost its ratings, and there's an official view that Brazilians' love for football will override all other problems.
Eu não acredito em manifestações na época da Copa do Mundo. Acho que a Copa do Mundo vai estar protegida pela vontade das pessoas em apoiar um grande evento. Eu acho que quando essas seleções começarem a desembarcar no Brasil e os turistas e as turistas de todo mundo começarem a desembarcar no Brasil, nós teremos um ambiente muito mais de festa do que de protesto.
But events in Rio last year proved otherwise, and could be an indication of what to expect during the World Cup in this city. On June 30th, 2013, undefeated Spain played Brazil in the Confederation Cup final at Maracana Stadium in Rio. This would be kind of a dry run for the World Cup. 6,000 police were deployed around the stadium versus 1,200 protesters. At 7 p.m. the match started, and with just a minute and a half into the game, Brazil got its first chance for an attack. Fred, number 9, made an astonishing goal while lying down. Outside the stadium, protesters played football with tear gas canisters. The police engaged Molotov cocktail throwing protesters with rubber bullets, tear gas, and stun grenades. Fred, one of the best attackers in football, said that he'd done a lot of good things laying down, but never a goal. Outside, the riot became more dramatic as the game continued, reaching a violent climax as Brazil's Neymar fired a second goal with his left foot high above the goalkeeper. Brazil pummeled Spain 3-0, defeating Spain's record 29-game winning streak. But this spectacular win wasn't enough to keep protesters off the streets. Rio de Janeiro is famous for its sprawling favelas. There are 750 of these slums stacked up on the hills throughout the city. Migrants from the countryside seeking work built these favelas, which have spread higher and higher into the mountains. But over the years, these slums have been taken over by drug traffickers and gangs. The deepest resentment against the Brazilian government can be found in these neighborhoods.
Antônio morador morre aí como inocente às vezes, polícia e quer botar culpa nos traficantes.
These vast slums, like the Complexo de Alemão in the northern sector of Rio, have long been neglected by the state. For decades, these places were left to rot, basic services are non-existent, and drug gangs have set up a parallel government. But under the banner of security for the World Cup and the 2016 Olympic Games, the government launched operations imposing military law and a de facto police state on a vast majority of Rio's urban poor. At the battalion headquarters of the Brazilian army at Complexo da Maré, Major Kruczek insists the pacification efforts are not linked to the World Cup.
Assim, essa operação, ela não é específica para a Copa do Mundo. Ela foi visualizada para trazer mais segurança nessa área aqui, que é uma área fundamental na cidade. É considerada a maior favela aqui do Rio de Janeiro. Então são 130 mil habitantes que vivem aqui nessa região, que já passou por um período muito grande de ausência do Estado, né? Então tem mais de 30 anos que vive-se uma situação assim de abandono mesmo, praticamente, né? De ações sociais, de policiamento também. Então as organizações criminosas, elas dominaram essa área aqui por muito tempo.
The operation is currently going on right now.
Tá, então nós já fizemos mais de 30 dias de atividade aqui. Ela funciona 24 horas por dia, 7 dias por semana. Which we see the cars, the people looking for drugs, looking for guns.
Do you think that the operation puts stress on the innocent people, the people who aren't criminals, having to deal with the military and the police coming in to do this work?
Aqui, a comunidade ela viveu muito tempo dominada pelos criminosos. Então eles têm receio de chegar e apoiar a gente, de conversar com a gente, com medo de ter uma retaliação depois do criminoso. Então, com o passar do tempo, nós vamos tirar esse medo que eles têm, né, e ver que o Estado está presente, dando segurança para a comunidade como um todo.
The pacification program resembles nothing less than a full-blown military operation. Rio's hotspots present some of the most challenging and dangerous terrain, and Brazilian elite units are some of the most highly trained in urban warfare. Right now we're at Favela do Maré. It's a favela situated in between two very important roads in Rio. Now, for a long time, a lot of the favelas in Rio were not under state control. There were no police here at all. They were controlled by gangs. So the government has started occupying these spaces, these neighborhoods, to try and bring them back under their control. Right now, we've got military here. And once the military clean up the neighborhood, they're going to send in the military police and then the civilian police. The civil police's elite squad, known as Core, will be among the first to respond to any trouble during the World Cup. Core spearheaded the pacification efforts of Complexo de Alemão, an operation famous in Brazil for being one of the deadliest.
Mostrar você a nossa base. Aqui marcou, foi um marco essa operação, foi a retomada do Complexo do Alemão. A nossa equipe foi a primeira equipe a entrar naquele dia no complexo. Isso aqui, eu tô aqui. Bacana, esse dia foi.
Walking around the police headquarters, it's apparent that the World Cup has been a windfall for the police and the private security business.
Esse é um carro blindado nosso, tá em manutenção. Tô procurando marca de tiro nele. Mas... E aí, tudo bem? Tá sem nenhuma marca de tiro aí? Tá, sério mesmo? Tá sem nenhuma?
Rapaz, eu tô mexendo na minha câmera, acho que não tem não. Pelo que o amigo falou ali, esse carro aqui
esse é o nosso carro blindado, que a gente costuma entrar nas comunidades aí. Aqui a gente consegue ver as marcas que quase penetram o veículo. Todos os calombos que ficam por fora, a gente abre isso aqui, encaixa o fuzil. Esse aqui é o mais novo, né? É o blindado mais novo. Aquele lá tá em manutenção.
É um monstrão, né, velho?
Então, essa é a nossa favela simulada. A gente projetou, essa favela foi projetada pelos próprios operacionais da CORE. Então a gente tem que se preocupar com a lateral, frente. Pode vir um ataque de cima sobre as lajes, onde eles costumam ficar muito. Às vezes a gente está muito preocupado com o que a gente está procurando e a gente não percebe o que tem aqui. Então a gente teve o cuidado de botar essa parte aqui para... Olha a dificuldade que você encontra, por exemplo, aqui. Se tem alguém escondido ali ou escondido aqui. Algumas vezes a gente encontra ambientes que são assim bem estreitos. Então a gente reproduziu todo esse tipo de ambiente que a gente podia encontrar numa... Você consegue ver aqui? Às vezes a gente vinha entrando por aqui, por esses caminhos, e eles pegavam a gente de cima. Todo o perigo que a gente detectou nas favelas, a gente trouxe para cá.
Do you ever have to jump down?
This is easy.
Yeah?
Yeah.
While the fake favela was cool, we wanted to hear what the cops do in the real favelas. Rio's elite police units are notoriously trigger-happy. Every year, officers kill about 1,300 people. A vast majority of them are poor and black inhabitants of the favelas. Thousands have also been disappeared. We're on our way to Favela Rocinha to meet with the wife of a man who was disappeared by the police last year. His name was Amarildo, and his story has resonated with many of the protesters in Brazil. His mysterious disappearance at the hands of the police call up memories of Brazil's military dictatorship past. Can you tell me what kind of person Amarildo was like?
Amarildo era pessoa boa na comunidade, nascido e criado, todo mundo conhecia ele. Até hoje as pessoas chegam em cima de mim e falam, Beth, nada do Amarildo, eu falei nada. A polícia matou e sumiu com restos mortais, sumiram com o corpo. O traficante mata e mostra o corpo. O policial mata e some. Então eu acho que o Estado botou extermínio nas comunidades, porque a ditadura acabou, para os ricos, para os pobres continua. Eu não vi ele levando meu marido, eu não vi ele levando porque eu estava dentro de casa. Cheguei aqui na segunda sede da UPP, meu marido não estava lá de fora, ela estava dentro da UPP, veio o gol bolinha, parou em frente ao UPP, meu marido já saiu com uma gemada para trás. Aí eu parei de polícia e falei assim, vocês trouxeram meu marido por quê? Ele falou assim, não, ele falou assim, você pode ir para casa. Aí o major veio e falou para mim e a família, liberei meu marido, que ele não tem nada contra a justiça. Aí veio para casa, cadê o marido? Eu quero isso já um mês, a marido sem aparecer. Aí foi como, isso aí já foi para redes sociais, para o mundo inteiro. A Rocinha tá aí, tipo assim, o marido sumiu, o que acontece? Teve aquele protesto, o mundo todo, a Rocinha inteira compartilhou comigo.
Amarildo's case drew even more people into the streets to join the protests as it fueled the fire of an already volatile population. Brazilians have had enough of the brutal police tactics, and they refuse to be controlled again by a military police state. In order to host the World Cup, FIFA demanded that Brazil go through a huge makeover in terms of security and infrastructure. On the ground in Rio, this translated into a war against drug gangs, but really it was part of a larger war against the disaffected population in the favelas. But the favelas fought back, killing officers and even shooting down a police helicopter. In the north zone of Rio, just 4 kilometers from the World Cup Stadium, 8,000 families occupied an abandoned telecommunications building. When it came time to clear them out in April this year to make way for the games, the streets erupted in violence. There will be no cup, has become a rallying cry across the country, resonating especially loudly from within these favelas. And each summary execution at the hands of the police has stoked more hatred towards the government and its grand plans for the rich. It seems the government's only response to this public anger has been to use more force. We went to a hillside slum called Favela Rocinha, one of the largest in Rio, to see how things have changed since the police gained control 2.5 years ago. Pacified in November of 2011, Favela Rocinha is now under 24-hour police surveillance.
Eu me chamo Velf, eu sou rapper, cria da favela da Rocinha, maior da América Latina. Estamos aqui na entrada da Rua 2. Estou aqui para mostrar para vocês comunidade pacífica, como a gente vive e os reflexos desse projeto do Estado em monitorar e fazer esse campo de concentração, manter a gente sempre monitorado pela polícia.
So I've been walking around Favela da Rocinha, being shown what's been happening since the pacification. And we met a young man who doesn't want to be named. He's part of the gangs, and he's going to tell us what's going on. So how do you and the people who live in the favelas feel about the World Cup?
Pô, a Copa é até bom que seja no Brasil, mas sendo que essa Copa é mais para rico. Porque, pô, pobre não tem condições de ver um jogo. Então, pra você ver que o povo não tá nem tão animado, que você não vê desenho na parede, não vê aquela bandeirinha como era antigamente, tudo enfeitado. Quer botar a Copa, o Brasil é um país da sede. Mas, e as pessoas que estão aí passando fome? Isso daí, esse lado eu não vejo, os hospitais. Um dia a mulher que passou na televisão, grávida, teve filho na rua, o PT que mesmo foi socorrer, no meio do chão. Uma coisa que, pô, não pode isso acontecer. O Brasil não pode, como um país desse grande, como disse, fazer a Copa, não pode deixar as coisas dessas acontecer.
Instead of investing in basic infrastructure like plumbing and hospitals, it seems like the only money the government is spending in the favelas is on cameras to monitor the poor and make sure they don't break the law. So how do you guys feel with cameras being put up everywhere?
Cara, aqui as pessoas têm uma opinião mais ou menos dividida. Tem pessoas que não ligam, estão nem aí. Tem pessoas que sentem sua privacidade invadida. Quando é em benefício dos policiais da UPP, pode ser que sirva para alguma coisa. Agora, se o morador precisar de uma prova, de uma covardia, como já tomei dura em frente à câmera, assim, se eu quisesse essas imagens para provar que os polícias fizeram mal a mim, eles não dariam, entendeu? Um exemplo, essa aqui, as pessoas muitos não gostam de ser monitorado por câmera. Essa aqui, por exemplo, está quebrada. Olha lá.
We wondered who was actually watching all these cameras. So we went with Matthias to find out what was behind all this Big Brother style monitoring.
We are going to the CICC, which is the Central Command Center for Rio. This is where they have all the cameras that monitor everything. And they have all the agencies there, the military police, the civil police, the federal police. I hope to get impressed, but at the same time, I hope not to get impressed, because if I get impressed, that means they're really watching us, and that's not cool. I can't understand what this bitch is talking. What the fuck do you want me to go? I hate this fucking GPS, man.
Driving around Rio with Matthias is always an adventure. If we're not getting lost, we're running out of fuel, or both.
Yeah, fuck.
Are we running out of fuel?
Yeah. I just hope we don't get out of fuel in the parking lot of that shit.
Next door to a circus school, the Command and Control Center is a brand new real-time intelligence and surveillance facility built for the World Cup. It cost the government almost $50 million to complete and is the central hub for all surveillance throughout the city. Few of Rio's residents know this facility even exists. It's so new that getting to its parking lot means an axle-braking drive over the sidewalk.
Ok, beleza. É assim mesmo?
So what just happened, Matthias? They asked us
To drive over the sidewalk to get into the parking lot. We're not supposed to do that shit, right? But okay, they're the government, so... Okay. I hope mom's car didn't get hurt.
The Command and Control Center is part of an ambitious plan to harness the power of big data and is headed by officials from the military police. Our first stop, the server room.
É o coração do centro. Todos os servidores, equipamentos estão instalados aqui. Memória de armazenamento, nós temos 98 terabytes, isso eu sei, e estamos colocando mais 130 terabytes na outra sala que o governo federal está disponibilizando.
The Command and Control Center was built up to deal with the World Cup and the 2016 Olympics, but it's also provided the government a powerful new tool to watch over the most troublesome favelas, which surround the World Cup stadium.
Essas câmeras que tem nas UPPs também estão linkadas?
São, todas visualizadas aqui. O Complexo do Alemão, a gente visualiza as câmeras dele aqui. As câmeras de segurança chegam aqui. Se o turista que veio para a Copa do Mundo, ele ligar no telefone emergencial, os dados da solicitação dele são transferidos para os policiais ou para os nossos representantes de cada instituição para despachar o recurso necessário para o atendimento. Tá? Recebemos aqui as imagens. Os helicópteros das polícias estão numa situação, por exemplo, manifestação. Bom, o helicóptero está com a imagem em cima da manifestação, conseguimos visualizar aqui em tempo real.
Quantos desses telões vão mostrar o jogo do Brasil?
Aqui? Nenhum.
Nenhum? Não acredito. Ninguém vai ver o jogo?
Batatinha? Radinho, né? Vai ter que...
The center is part of a larger plan to keep tabs on protests. In a move that's been met with widespread popular resistance, the Brazilian government has tried to pass a new anti-terror law that would make protests illegal. The law would allow 15 to 30-year sentences for people inciting civil unrest. Like many Latin American countries, Brazil has no anti-terror legislation because such laws were heavily abused during the military dictatorship, which ended less than 20 years ago. Brazilians refuse to let the military regain control of the country. More and more citizens are now taking their anger into the streets. Rio's favelas may now be under police control, but little has changed for residents. Criminal gangs may be temporarily silenced, but now some police have taken their place, skimming money and enforcing their right to do so. Some police are now shaking down businesses here, from the providers of basic services like healthcare, water, and electricity, to the owners of food stands, bars, and nightclubs like this, in the southern Rio slum known as Favela Vidigal.
Side of Rio, which is a bit wealthier. And since the pacification of the favelas, gentrification has started happening here. Now these street parties, they were free. So the poor people would always come and party, and the rich people were welcome because they'd buy drugs. But now that you gotta pay to come into these clubs, the wealthy people are here, but the poor people have been left out.
It's not just getting into the club that now costs more, but prices are soaring on necessities like food, transportation, rent, and what hits hardest for Brazilians, the cost of football matches. We went to see how this plays out in Rio's newly refurbished Maracana Stadium. The match was between two of Rio's oldest teams, Flamengo and Fluminense.
Flamengo is the biggest team in Brazil, so lower class people, you know, and while Fluminense, the other team, is totally upper class. After the Fluminense made the second goal, they started chanting silence in the favela, silence in the favela. They're telling that people shut up.
You've got the rich people actually saying shut up more people.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. Do you think any of these people are going to make it to the World Cup, or do you think it'll be too expensive?
Probably going to be expensive. The tickets are like $500 up, you know?
Not only can most not afford to attend the games, but Brazilian vendors can't even profit from all of the money that's coming in from tourists. To accommodate FIFA's requests, Brazil overturned a decade-long ban on beer sales inside stadiums, while at the same time banning beer sales within a 2-kilometer radius from where the games are being held, further shutting out working-class Brazilians who make their living selling beer outside the matches.
All the government propaganda about the World Cup was, you're going to bring lots of money and jobs to the country, but as it approach, we are seeing that's quite different. They done this all their fucking lives, you know, selling beer outside here. And when there's going to be the hugest games here, they won't be allowed. They will be like 2 kilometers for that, probably selling beer for the protesters.
Eu tenho um amigo meu que ele é dono, é comerciante de um bar de frente pro Maracanã. O cara investiu dinheiro na Copa e agora o cara tomou um prejuízo aí, ó, de mais de R$1.000. E não pode vender cerveja na Copa? Por que não? Copa porra nenhuma. Fuck you, FIFA.
Fuck you, FIFA. That's what they're saying here, in this sprawling encampment in Sao Paulo, not far from one of the gleaming new World Cup stadiums.
So right now, we're at the People's Cup camp. It's a huge camp of over 4,000 families that are here protesting, and we're going to be showed around by an organizer, Edmilson. He's going to take us into the camp.
E hoje esse estádio está reedificando isso aqui, ó, né? O pessoal tentando ter sua casa, lutando com os atos, né? Falando que nosso...
Well, we stopped here in the middle of the camp. We've got a fire going, so we're going to ask the locals here what they think about the World Cup.
Copa do Mundo, aí aluguel aumenta, a dificuldade vem, educação zero, né? Porque tudo que eles estão gastando milhões nesses estádios, eles poderiam dar uma moradia, uma educação. Porque se você for para outro país, para lá, a Copa sim, já está pronto para turismo, mas o nosso Brasil não está para ter uma sede de uma Copa do jeito que está acontecendo.
But the government is determined to show Brazil is ready and able to host the games and will use any necessary force to make sure things go according to plan.
Então hoje nós temos aqui um treinamento de controle de distúrbios que foi ofertado pelo FBI, a polícia de Chicago e a polícia de Los Angeles. O pessoal que vai atuar nos grandes eventos do Rio de Janeiro.
This exercise shows how they would remove a single protester, but there will most likely be tens of thousands, with teachers, security guards, bus drivers, trash collectors, and even police themselves, threatening to strike and shut down Brazil's cities during the tournament.
Dança, Dilma, dança até o chão, que na Copa da FIFA vai ter manifestação. Dança, Dilma, dança até o chão, que na Copa da FIFA vai ter manifestação. A FIFA vai cair! A FIFA vai cair! Vai cair! Vai cair! A FIFA vai cair! Vai cair! Vai cair! A FIFA vai cair! Da Copa eu abro mão. Eu quero mais dinheiro pra saúde e educação.
The competition to host the World Cup is often as hard-fought as the tournament itself. That's because the chosen host gets a chance to show off to the world what it's capable of. The Brazilian government has seized the opportunity to show that it's arrived as a top global economic power. But it's not just the government that gets a chance to tell its story. The people do too, including those who don't typically get a voice at home, let alone abroad.
O que a gente espera para a Copa é que a população volte às ruas e que não só com a cara tapada, independente de estar com máscara ou não, usando a tática ou não. A gente não é um grupo, a gente é manifestante, é militante e a gente só está reivindicando direitos básicos da população.
And now that the games have started, they're going to make sure they're heard loud and clear.